I reviewed The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. Throughout my presentation, I want you guys to note what you guys look for in a teammate. What personality traits, work ethic, and qualities you look for a person, whether you're on a team sport, whether we're looking for a teammate or someone to work with, whether it's like a job or something. To get started on the summary, Jeff's uncle Bob gets sick and has to take a leave, so he becomes the boss of VB Construction. Jeff Shanley takes over his family's locally rubber construction firm and realizes that the only way to deliver on the two biggest projects in the company's history is to rapidly build a culture of hiring and developing around the virtues that they have to decide. To do that, he'll have to confront and risk losing talented employees who don't know how to work on a team and convince his fiery VP of operations not to lower the company's hiring standards in the face of short-term business pressure. The two new projects that they have to conquer are the Queen of Valley Hospital Wing and St. Helena Hotel. These are the two biggest projects that VB Construction has ever worked on. Jeff gets paired with Claire, who's the head of HR, and Bob, who is the head of field operations. Their task is to hire 80 new employees, and to break that down, they're going to need a project manager, 3 foremen, a senior engineer, a half dozen supervisors, and 50 contractors. They want to make sure that their new employees that they recruit follow the virtues for VB. They decide that humble, hungry, and smart describes the culture they have at VB. They're also going to re-interview current employees to see where things are going wrong. To go more in depth about being humble, they're looking for someone who has lack of excessive ego or concerns about status. They're quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek attention for their own. They share credit, emphasize team over self, and define success collectively rather than individually. This is the single greatest and most indispensable attribute of being a team player, according to Patrick Lencioni. The hungry team player is someone who is always looking for more things to do, learn, and responsibility. They never have to be pushed by a manager to work harder. They're self-motivated and diligent. They're constantly thinking about the next step and the next opportunity, and they loathe the idea that they might be perceived as slackers. Someone who is smart is not someone who is smart in the classroom or street smart. It's someone who has common sense about people. They have the ability to be interpersonally appropriate and aware. They know what is happening in a group situation and how to deal with others in the most effective way. They ask good questions and listen to what others are saying. They also stay engaged in conversations intently. It's not one virtue that makes a team player at VB, it's all three combined. So to go on about the summary, they decide, the three, Jeff, Claire, and Bob, decide that they need another person on their team of their head. They look at Ted Marchbanks, who is a recent retiree at another firm, and a firm that's bigger than VB. So you could tell he's very qualified. When they sit down in the interview, everything seems to be okay. Like, he seems to be humble, he seems to be hungry, he seems to be smart. But after digging further, they realize that he doesn't treat his other employees, such as like a receptionist or someone of that level, as equally as he would treat the head of HR. So they realize he's not smart, so they do not hire Ted, but instead they look within the company. They look at their current project in Waterbank, and they decide that, like, things aren't getting done. Like, they're not meeting their deadlines, they're not meeting their time deadlines, their work deadlines, and they have to figure out what is going on, like, what is wrong, why is this not happening? And so the two people over ahead of this project are Nancy and Craig, who is the executive. With Craig, they love him. They think he's smart, he's humble, and he's hungry. He's not as doesn't have the experience as maybe Ted Marchbanks did, but they decide to bring him on as their fourth and final partner. They decide that Nancy is the problem, and when they identified the problem, then they sat down with her, and they told her that, she needs to change because when you talk to her, she comes off as cold. Yeah, she gets stuff done. Yeah, she's pretty humble about her work, but she wasn't people smart. She didn't have common sense about people. She was rubbing people the wrong way and losing employees that were good for VB. At this point, they were like, we need to look for quality and not quantity. So when Stancy decided to change, they got to bring back Pedro, and he came back because of Nancy's humility and her change. And that was the moral victory of the entire book, was to bring back someone who, had these qualities, but left because things weren't working well for him here. So when hiring everyone else, they realized they had the responsibility to respect the culture, and improvement was not an option. There is 5 behavioral manifestations, which are trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. So after the team really got to the drawing board and figured all this out, they hired all their people and they got started on the project. But this book in general was not about the project. It was about the idea and the teamwork. And we can relate this to organizational behavior, because organizational behavior is the study of how people act within groups. Its principles are applied primarily in attempts to make businesses operate more effectively. There was a problem. They identified it, and they got results. They decided that their VBs, team players, are humble, hungry, and smart. And overall, this made the business operate more effectively once they got rid of people that were not did not fit the culture. And the better they worked better in groups when there was less conflict. So as a team player, it includes teamwork. So the teamwork is the combined action of a group of people, especially when effective and efficient. VB has found a new confidence. They are a jackass-free zone, according to Bob. And the big picture is really to put the right people on the bus. Because for every company, they have different cultures, different virtues that they stand by. So every company is different, but for VB, this worked. My review on this book is it was a great book to show the organizational behavior aspect, because they showed the thinking steps. They got to sit down, they got to interview, and you got to read their thought process on how they got to where they got their results, because they identified, adapted, and then got the results. Their problem-solving skills included interviewing, talking to others, and then changing. Because Nancy, she became the villain in the beginning when she was wrong and she was just not being smart. But at the end, she became a team player. And there was nothing wrong with that. Change is good. And that resulted in the results that they needed. They needed to hire their 60 people, and they did that. And then they got started right away on the job. Things I took away from this book are hiring, assessing current employees, developing employees who are lacking in one or more of the virtues, and embedding the model into an organizational culture. So to start with the interview process, the most important part of the interviewing for team players is simply knowing which answers and behaviors are the best indicators of humility, hunger, and people smarts, and then making the interview as revealing as possible. The next step is assessing current employees. The first step is confirming that the employee is an ideal team player. The second step is helping the employee improve and become one, or step 3, deciding to move the employee out. The third step is developing employees who are lacking in one or more of the virtues. The most important part of the developmental process, and the part that is so often missing, is a leader's commitment to constantly reminding an employee that she's not doing what is needed. Without this, improvement will not occur. If your employee is lacking one or more of the virtues, these are developed behaviors. These are not always learned, so they can be developed for change. The fourth step is embedding the model into an organizational culture. I believe that teamwork is not a virtue, but rather a choice. It's a strategic decision and an intentional one, which means that it's not for everyone. To make sure of this, you need to be explicit and bold, catch and revere, and direct and address the situations. Overall, this leadership fable really showed us how to recognize and cultivate the 3 essential virtues, which are humble, hungry, and smart. The ideal team player was the perfect example of an organizational behavior, and I will be sure to recommend it to colleagues and coworkers.